I'm George Richardson, and I'm dying. I thought I'll tell you my story before I go. A story about the greatest test I ever created and how it revealed what truly matters in this world. You see, I built my fortune from nothing. Started with a small construction company in my 20s when my hands were calloused and my back ached every night. Now I own half the buildings in the downtown business district, a $340 million empire. Not bad for a kid who used to deliver newspapers before school, but wealth brings its own problems. The biggest one, knowing what to do with it when you're gone. I have 3 children. Maybe you have children too. If you do, you know they're as different as fingerprints, even though they grew up in the same home. My eldest, Michael, smart, ambitious, always in a hurry. Followed me into business, but he prefers quick profits over patient growth. Nice house, nicer cars, expensive watches. Been married 3 times, each wife younger than the last. You know the type. My daughter Patricia, the middle child, creative, dreamy, never quite found her footing. Studied art in college, bounced between galleries and boutiques, lives comfortably off her trust fund, starts a new business every year or so. They always fail within months. Then there's Thomas, my youngest, the surprise baby, as my late wife used to call him. While his siblings went to fancy private universities, Thomas chose a state college and became a high school teacher. Lives in a modest house, still drives the car we gave him at graduation. I love all my children. But as I felt the clock ticking, doctors aren't optimistic about this cancer, I started wondering, who are they really? What happens to character when money enters the picture? So I decided to find out. I invited them to our monthly family dinner. The one night when we all pretend to be a normal family and I dropped my bombshell. I've decided to give most of my fortune to charity when I'm gone, I announced. You'll each receive enough to be comfortable, but not wealthy. The rest will go to causes I believe in. The silence lasted about 3 seconds before all hell broke loose. "After all we've done for you," Michael shouted, face turning that particular shade of red I'd seen when he was denied things as a child. "I've helped run your companies for 20 years. We're your family," Patricia argued, tears already forming. Always quick to cry, that one. That money should stay with us. What will people think? Only Thomas remained quiet, watching my face, studying me the way he used to when he was little, trying to figure out if I was serious about bedtime. I raised my hand for silence. "I'm not dead yet," I said with a smile that probably didn't hide my pain very well, "and I haven't made my final decision. I have a proposal." What I suggested was simple. Each of them would write me a letter explaining why they deserved an inheritance. I would read these letters and consider their arguments before finalizing my will. Michael and Patricia couldn't leave fast enough. Already strategizing in the driveway, I could see them through the window. Over the next week, they called each other constantly, each trying to learn what the other was writing. Michael, I later discovered, hired a professional writer to craft his letter. Patricia included childhood photos and mementos. When I approached Thomas about his letter, my youngest son just shook his head. "I won't compete for your money, Dad," he said simply. "It's yours to give as you choose." You know, it's fascinating what money does to people, especially the prospect of losing it. I observed my children carefully during this time. Michael bought an even more expensive car, presumably to show his business acumen. Patricia suddenly became attentive, calling daily to check on my health when she'd previously gone months without visiting. Thomas continued his normal routine, teaching classes, volunteering at a youth center on weekends, and joining me for our usual Sunday coffee without once mentioning the inheritance. What would you have done in their situation? Would the prospect of millions change who you are? Be honest with yourself. 3 months after that dinner, I invited my children to our family lake house, the place where they learned to swim, where we spent summers catching fireflies and roasting marshmallows. After dinner, I distributed 3 sealed envelopes. These contain information about your inheritances, I explained. I've made my decision. Michael and Patricia tore open their envelopes like children at Christmas. Inside each was a bank statement showing $5 million had been transferred to their accounts. Their faces, I wish you could have seen them. Relief, triumph, victory. Thomas opened his envelope last. Inside was only a handwritten note that read, "Your inheritance is my wisdom." True wealth isn't measured by what you have, but by what you don't need. The room fell silent. Thomas stared at the note, his expression unreadable. His siblings exchanged glances, half embarrassed, half satisfied. However, I continued, breaking the uncomfortable silence, these initial transfers are only part of your inheritance. The rest depends on what you do with it. I explained that I'd given them each exactly the same opportunity. What happened next was entirely up to them. As they drove away that evening, Michael was already on the phone with his broker. Patricia was researching exotic vacation properties. Thomas carefully folded my note and placed it in his wallet. 6 months passed, shone through changing seasons outside the lake house window. Now, here's where it gets interesting. 6 months later, we gathered again at the lake house. Michael arrived in a Ferrari wearing a tailored suit and a new watch that cost more than Thomas's annual salary. Patricia stepped out of a chauffeured car, returning from a 3-month tour of European spas and boutiques. Thomas parked his same old sedan, looking tired but content. Over dinner, I asked each of them what they'd done with their inheritance. Michael described his investments, a new vacation home, and his stake in a promising tech startup. Patricia detailed her travels, her renovated apartment, and the small gallery she'd opened, though she admitted it wasn't profitable yet. "And you, Thomas?" I asked. "I used the wisdom you gave me," Thomas replied quietly. "I started a program at my school teaching financial literacy to underprivileged students. We've helped 3 families get out of debt and 6 students secure college scholarships." I nodded thoughtfully, then rose from my chair. My legs weren't working well by then, but I needed to stand for this. It's time I explained the real purpose of these past 6 months. Dramatic pause. I revealed that the bulk of my $340 million fortune, over $300 million, had been placed in a family foundation. Michael and Patricia would keep the $5 million they'd received, but nothing more. Thomas would direct the foundation, deciding which charitable causes to support. The expressions that crossed their faces in that moment, I'll carry them with me to my grave. "But that's not fair," Patricia protested. "You tricked us." "No," I replied gently. "I gave you each exactly what you wanted. Michael and Patricia, you wanted money without responsibility. You have it. Thomas, you wanted to make a difference without seeking reward. Now you can do so on a scale you never imagined." I turned to all three children, these people I'd brought into the world who turned out so differently despite sharing the same blood. The greatest inheritance I could leave wasn't wealth, but the understanding that a legacy is built on what you give, not what you take. That was 2 years ago. The doctors gave me 6 months then, but I've always been stubborn. In that time, I've watched the Richardson Foundation transform thousands of lives through education initiatives and community development programs. Michael and Patricia eventually joined the foundation's board, humbled by watching their younger brother's vision unfold. And Thomas? He continued teaching, though now his classroom extends far beyond the walls of his high school. As for me, I've found that knowing how your story ends brings a certain peace. I won't be remembered for the buildings I built, but for the lives I've changed, mostly through Thomas's work with the foundation. We all face inheritance tests in our lives, moments that reveal whether we value what we can get or what we can give. My test wasn't just for my children, it was for me too. So before I go, let me ask you one thing. What's your true inheritance going to be? What will you leave behind that matters? Because I promise you this, the digits in your bank account won't be mentioned at your funeral, but the lives you touched, they'll tell your real story long after you're gone. I'm George Richardson, and I'm dying. And now you know my story. What will yours be?